Chapter 4. Tasha wasn't sure whether she was able to erect her walls and so finally block that other voice in her mind, or whether it simply went away. All she knew was that the inner conversation ceased, at least for a while. Not that she was able to sleep. In the end, by the time morning sunlight began to brighten her windows, she was up, showered, dressed, and very restless. The other voice had made a lot of sense about the uselessness of Tasha going to the building superintendent to report the break-in, seeing as how she had no evidence that it happened, and hadn't reported at the time or afterward anything she had seen. Of course, she could always at least ask to see the security videos from the previous night, but what would that accomplish? Nothing. Electing to have her morning coffee and some kind of muffin or pastry out of the apartment that no longer felt at all safe to her, Tasha went downstairs and through the lobby, casually greeting the security guard at the main desk and the concierge at hers as she passed. She knew both of them by name, just as she had known the guard she had seen working the previous night. She had made it her business to know who guarded her building, her condo, for all the good that had done. Security is an illusion. Definitely her own voice in her mind now, nothing else. Tasha went out into the mild January morning, joining the other early risers on the sidewalk. It was a Saturday, so the people moving about were mostly casual and unhurried, enjoying the sunshine and fresh air. At least that was how they appeared. But Tasha had the notion that at least some of them were not what or who they appeared to be. She wanted to chalk that up to paranoia, but it was less a thought than an odd inner chill breeze causing the hair on the nape of her neck to stand out. Instinct. She felt surrounded somehow, and not at all in the sense of being part of a crowd. Not because she was on a city street. Not because people were all around her, most clearly preoccupied by their own thoughts and concerns. What Tasha felt was something a lot more primitive, even primal. There was a threat. Someone was watching her right now. She hesitated for only a few moments near the doorway into her building, then ignored her own uneasiness and headed for the crosswalk, her ultimate destination, the coffee shop on the corner and diagonally across from her condo. It wasn't part of a chain, the coffee shop, but a local business that had been here for a long time. There were little tables both inside the shop and outside on the wide sidewalk. Tasha, as usual, chose a table outside, sitting with her back to a little corner niche that was brick rather than glass window. Something solid at her back, positioned so that no one could approach her unseen. She began to think of it as her seat, and had been amused to find herself feeling offended the previous week to find it occupied one morning. She thought she might have even glared at the woman who had sat there totally focused on her cell phone. Tweeting, emailing, sending someone a text or replying to one, playing a game, who knew? Just a few moments after Tasha settled into her corner, someone came to take her order. As jittery as she felt, she still needed her morning caffeine, and so she ordered a double-shot latte and a muffin. Waiting for her order to come, Tasha wished she could pull out her cell phone and occupy herself with it. But there were two reasons why she couldn't do that. One, the more she used the phone, the quicker it died on her. And she was wary of not being able to use it if she really needed to at some point. And two, there was no way she could focus on anything as innocuous as email or a game. Not when she felt so edgy, not after last night. And there was a third reason she really didn't want to think much about. The text. She didn't want to look at her phone and find another text like that one waiting for her. Dead. A threat, a promise, or just a taunt? Tasha didn't know, but as she looked out on the people moving casually along the sidewalks, the Saturday traffic passing her little corner of the world, she admitted to herself that it was something she couldn't avoid thinking about. And yet, It was, if anything, less unnerving than watching 3 men silently enter her apartment in the middle of the night. The text was like a flourish somehow, done for show rather than purpose. It had certainly given her a chill if that had been the objective, but the eerily silent visit from those men had been more than enough to do that much. She was still chilled, if the truth be told, and she found her gaze roving all around, not really looking at any one person, yet watching all of them, wondering who was watching her. "That's a lot of aspirin," Brody noted as he watched Murphy swallow 6 pills with a drink of her coffee. "I have a lot of headache," Murphy grimaced, and shifted her chair a bit back under the shade of the awning. "Jesus, it's bright out here." "The sunny south," she grunted. "Not a morning person, are you?" Murphy didn't waste a glare. "No, not when I've been up all night." "You couldn't take a break?" She was awake, so I was awake. "And you didn't see how they got into the building?" "I did not." There was something in her grim tone that said she took that feeling personally. "And they were able to hack into the security system without raising any red flags?" "Apparently. Building security looks calm today, and I doubt they would if they were aware of what happened last night. No technical people in the building to check out, service, or fix anything. The other residents I've seen leave the building so far also looked as though they had no worries at all. She's the only one, and you have to look close to realize just how jumpy she is. She knows she's the one they came for. She watched them come for her from the stairwell." Brody looked thoughtful. "So alert but curious. I'm not sure that's such a good thing." "She's known for a while she was being watched. Last night she saw men come for her. 3 men. So she knows if she had any doubt that it isn't a stalker kind of problem, it's worse than that. A lot more inexplicable than that, a lot more deadly." "She didn't call the police?" "She didn't even call the building super or the security desk in the lobby. She's not a stupid woman, Brody, and she doesn't know who to trust. All she knows is that danger is all around her, that she's safer with people all around her, and she's not sure if it's instinct or something else urging her to stay put rather than run." "How long were you in her head?" "It's not quite like that, and you know it." "How long?" "Off and on all night." "That part of the reason for your headache?" "Oh, yeah, sleepless nights I can handle. It's no sleep on top of being a psychic conduit that's causing the jackhammers pounding inside my head." "You need to get some sleep." "No shit." Brody sighed. "Look, I'm sorry. I was delayed. It couldn't be helped." "Meeting a possible new ally, I heard. Good one?" "Very, I think. Offers us a pretty long reach inside law enforcement, but his position is a little tricky." "A lot of people are close to him, maybe too close, maybe close enough to know too much about us before we're ready for them to know, if we ever are. And I'd feel better if I knew how he found out about us. He was very elusive about that, without raising red flags in my head. Neat trick, that." Murphy eyed the big man across the table from her. He was a physically powerful man, enough so as to give anyone pause, even slouched down in the chair as he was. And he was very good-looking in a dark, brooding way. But his eyes, those very, very sharp eyes, sentry eyes, gave the lie to his seemingly relaxed body. He was a born guardian. A born guardian. Murphy wondered actually for the first time if that was the way of things in their very unusual world. Had they all been born to do this after all? Was it as random as it appeared, or was it fate? She had often felt that she herself had been born for this work. "You're frowning at me," Brody told her. "My headache is giving me ideas I don't like." His brows lifted in question. "Never mind." Murphy glanced around them, more by habit than anything else, to reassure herself they couldn't be overheard. Yet she still lowered her voice when she said, "You are meeting Bishop." Brody's sentry eyes became even sharper. Sharp enough, Murphy thought idly, to slice through something or someone. "Want to tell me how you knew that?" "Just trying to ease your mind. He knows about us because he made contact with me a few months back." Brody didn't look as if his mind had been eased at all. She shook her head slightly. "I move around more than most, you know that. I've crossed his path a few times. His and some of his team members." Grim, Brody said, "Please don't tell me any of his team knows about us." "Any of his team know about us?" He said not. He was telling the truth, just him and his wife Miranda. A unique connection between those two, and it has nothing to do with marriage vows or wedding rings. Brody refused to be sidetracked. "From what he told me, nearly every member of his team is psychic, and a fair number of them are telepaths. You really think something like this can be kept secret inside a group like that, doing the sort of work they do?" "It's because they do the sort of work they do that they aren't likely to even notice us. Bishop trains his people to shield whenever possible and to focus very narrowly. Their focus is killers, mostly of the serial variety, and they have plenty to occupy their minds, which is sad when you think about it. On the other hand, they go up against murderers they can actually chase and catch and cage or kill. And we have on our hands virtually invisible enemies and a mysterious conspiracy, or several of them. I've never been quite sure." "Murphy," she frowned at him, "look, Bishop put that unit of his together in the teeth of official opposition and scorn within the law enforcement community. It's been an uphill battle for him all the way, still is in some situations. But the thing he's held to with teeth and claws is that there's nothing at all unnatural or inhuman about psychic abilities. They're just other senses not everybody happens to have." Brody waited. "He and his people have worked their asses off for years, tracking and caging or destroying human monsters. And they've done it using a combination of law enforcement and investigative training and their psychic abilities, which they bend over backward to keep matter of fact and firmly grounded in scientific possibility. Just other tools in the toolbox, like their guns and expertise with computers, their martial arts, or profiling, or whatever else each agent specializes in. Bishop and his people can't do their jobs if other law enforcement officials can't take them seriously. Any hint of some vast, mysterious conspiracy linking abducted psychics and his unit would be left out of the Bureau. It's in his best interest to keep our secrets to himself, and nobody knows that better than he does." After a moment, Brody said, "I don't doubt his intent much, but in a unit full of telepaths. Listen, you know that old saying about how two people can keep a secret only if one of them is dead?" "Yeah." "Well, we both know people can keep a secret. People can keep a lot of secrets for a long time, if the stakes are high enough, if the secrets are important enough, if it matters enough." She paused. "It matters to Bishop. What's happening to psychics, the threat against them, it matters to him. If we need him to, he'll take our secrets to his grave." Henry McCord had a lifetime of practice in hiding what he could do. 36 years, more or less. He could actually remember the first time he had seen a spirit, at his grandfather's funeral. The old man had stood on the other side of the casket and winked at him. Henry had been 6. So, 30 years of learning to cope in whatever way he could, realizing early on that grown-ups didn't want him to talk about the dead people, then it made them really uncomfortable. which had puzzled a childish Henry, since it seemed they would have liked to know that something of themselves survived death. It had reassured Henry, at least then. Now, he didn't even know if he still believed that. And despite his several conversations with Bishop, he was still unconvinced that he could ever learn to control his abilities well enough to make some use of them. He had tried to open a connection, a door, Bishop had called it, without success. He had tried meditation and biofeedback, which had left him feeling calm but still unable to see spirits when he wanted to. There had even been a few dark times when he tried both alcohol and various drugs, also to no effect, except to leave him grateful that he didn't have an addictive personality. So Henry went on with his pseudo-normal life as an architect who specialized in restoring historic old buildings, and never told anyone, except Bishop, that his seemingly uncanny knack for finding original doors and windows and other fixtures for old houses was simply the fact that most original owners showed him where to look. He never asked, they just appeared and showed him. Unlike what he'd seen in various movies and TV shows about ghosts and hauntings, Henry had never had to face a negative experience. No angry or malevolent spirits. No spirits that looked disfigured or deformed or even showed the causes of their deaths. Just helpful spirits dressed in period costume who led the way through basements and attics and storage buildings to things that belonged in whatever building he was restoring. His own theory was that because he was restoring old buildings to their former glory, there was no reason why any spirit should have negative feelings toward him. Bishop had said it wasn't that simple, but Henry hadn't been interested in learning more, and it had showed. Just because he had to live with this didn't mean he especially wanted to understand how it worked. So Henry went about his life as though everything were normal. He did his work, talked to investors and clients and landlords, and of course an endless parade of inspectors whose job it was to make sure he was doing his job correctly, and followed a seemingly endless succession of spirits to odd storage areas where he recovered original fixtures and fittings and even furniture designed and built, probably on site for the project he was working on. Long and erratic hours had prevented him from having much of a social life, or at least that was what he told himself. It was okay with him because he was a solitary soul at heart and perfectly comfortable with his own company. But then, while working just after the new year on the restoration of a plantation house outside Charleston, he gradually realized that spirits had stopped showing up. Common sense told him there should be a lot of spirits at a place like this one because it sure as hell had a lot of history. But no spirits showed up. He hadn't tried reaching out for them in a pretty long time and didn't consciously do so then. But entirely without thinking about it, he opened a door. Almost at once he was aware of spirits all around him, but hiding somehow, drawing back away from him as in fear. Henry barely had time to register the absurdity of that when he became aware of something else. It was getting dark. In the middle of the chilly January day, inside a huge house whose many windows let in lots of light, it was getting dark. He thought maybe a rare winter thunderstorm was brewing up at first, but when he turned to look at one of the windows, he saw that it was very bright outside, the sunlight glinting off the windshield of his car, and the glimpse he could catch of the sky showed it clear and blue. But it was getting darker all the same. Close the door. Close the door. Hurry. Henry, you have to close the door. What the hell? He muttered. Because the spirits had never talked to him. They led, they pointed, they smiled, silently. Even inside his own head, only silence. Until now. The urgency was unmistakable, and Henry tried to close the door he wasn't even sure how he'd been able to open. He tried, and then he felt as well as saw the shadows closing around him, Not spirits, something else. Something that made his very soul quiver in absolute terror. He kept trying to shut the door, but felt some kind of force he didn't recognize, holding the door open so they could get to him. Inky black, icy cold, sliding and blending and slithering all around him, touching him, taking him. The blackness swept over Henry McCord, and the last thing he remembered was suddenly wishing he hadn't lived his life quite so alone. It was one of her volunteer days at the shelter, and Tasha was grateful to be busy and occupied, even above the satisfaction she always felt in doing the work of helping abandoned dogs and cats. And there were people around all day, people she knew, people she had never once felt threatened by in any way, so that helped too. For a while, she was almost able to forget a threat existed. Almost. At the end of the day, she went along with a few others to a casual restaurant near the shelter, because they were all tired and the only decision they wanted to make about dinner was to point at something that looked good on the menu. So it was a bit later than usual when she pulled her car into her space outside the condo, well after the winter night darkness descended. Her space was as close as possible to the building, another of her attempts at safety and security, and the entire parking area was actually designed with safety in mind. It was well lit and surrounded by wrought iron fencing that was attractive, but would also be difficult to scale. Residents gained access to the small courtyard via a gate that, as part of the entire security system, was manned around the clock. The guard manning the gatehouse tonight had been cheerful and calm, nothing at all in his bearing indicating he felt at all uneasy about the security of the parking lot that was his area of responsibility. And still, with all that, Tasha found herself hurrying to the building's door, hurrying to swipe her card and punch in the code, hurrying to close the door behind her. She didn't realize she'd been holding her breath, and for way too long, until she leaned against the wall by the door and heard it escape her tense body in a rush. Damn it. Tasha hated to feel so out of control. Someone was watching her. She knew someone was watching her, but she couldn't see them. Didn't know where they were or who they were or why the hell they were watching her at all. She wasn't being paranoid. She knew that she was being watched. Because she was psychic, that other voice in her head had told her the previous night. The voice that all day today and even now, even when she let herself think about it, was absent. Everything all right, Ms. Solomon? She started and looked at the security guard. Yes, of course everything's fine, Haas. His last name, no title. It was the compromise the security staff and residents had reached after some debate when the building had been completed and waiting residents moved in. No one liked the formality of honorifics or titles for the security staff, or the informality of first names on either side, so they were left with this. So far it worked. I'm heading back toward the elevator, Hawes said. Tasha managed a brief laugh. Do I look? She didn't know quite how to finish that. It's an odd night, Hawes said, matter-of-factly. Most everybody who's been out tonight has come home jumpy. I expect it's a full moon. Affects people even when they don't realize. Tasha hadn't even realized the moon was full. She headed for the elevator, Hawes walking more or less beside her. He was a former cop, she knew that much. A Chicago street cop who had chosen to semi-retire in a warm southern city. Most of the security staff had the same sort of background, former cops or retired military. If anything, overtrained for security jobs in a residential condo. They were all very calm and seemingly unflappable, the women as well as the men. The security staff was roughly 1/3 female, while the concierge staff was about 2/3 female. Every single one of them a trained professional who at least appeared to take this job as seriously as they had taken their previous ones. So how had those men gotten past them the night before? Tasha almost asked Hawes about it. Almost. Instead, keeping questions and doubts to herself, she stepped into the elevator when the doors closed and lifted a hand in farewell as they began. When the doors opened and lifted a hand in farewell as they began to close. Good night. Good night, Miss Solomon. The ride to the third floor was brief and uneventful. The hallway was empty of any threat. The apartments she passed on the way to hers were quiet, no matter what activities might have been going on inside, thanks to excellent soundproofing. For the first time, Tasha thought that maybe the soundproofing shouldn't be quite so good, because if anyone inside were to cry out for help, refusing to finish that thought, she let herself into her apartment. The lights she always turned on before leaving were still burning. She hated walking into a dark room, always had. Even before all this, before she'd been conscious of any threat against her, she had hated walking into darkness. I wonder why. Did I always know there was a threat out there somewhere, sometime? No, that's stupid. No inner but alien voice offered a response. She didn't put her purse down as usual, but first methodically searched the apartment, just as she had after those men had left. Every room, every closet, every cabinet. She opened everything that was closed and checked thoroughly inside. She found nothing, which should have made her feel at least a bit better. It really didn't. Tasha turned on the TV in the living room, more for background noise than anything else, and chose a channel that tended to run science documentaries. The one airing at that time appeared to be something about how life in the universe had begun. She went into her lamplit bedroom, hesitated for a moment, then gathered up her pajamas and went into the bathroom, pushing the door to behind her. Living alone, it really wasn't her habit to close doors between rooms, but her edginess also made her feel oddly exposed. It made sense, she thought. When you knew someone was watching you, you felt watched all the time, even safely alone behind walls and draperies and locked doors. Security is an illusion. Her own inner voice reminding herself of something she had no need to be reminded of. She wasn't safe here, and it was both useless and stupid to pretend otherwise. She stripped, put her clothing into the hamper, and then took a long hot shower. The water felt good. Breathing in the steam felt good, and Tasha felt considerably better and more relaxed when she finally stepped out of the shower. She wrapped her hair in one towel and dried off with another, rubbed a lavender-scented body lotion into muscles that had worked hard that day, and then pulled on her pajamas. It wasn't until she was loosening the towel covering her hair that she turned toward the mirror. It was steamed over, not surprisingly, but Tasha realized she could see bits of herself. A pale green eye that was oddly wide, strands of dark auburn hair, her fingers near her temple as the towel fell to the floor behind her. She could see bits of herself, she realized, because letters were written on the steamy mirror, words that made her grow cold to the bone. You can't hide, Tasha.